Hi, my name is Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this short video, which goes alongside a longer written review, I'm having a look at the new Laowa 85mm 2:1 macro lens. Now Laowa, Venus Optics is the company that makes it, Laowa the brand, make an interesting collection of macro lenses, wide angle lenses. I've looked at things like their shift lenses before as well, and they're interesting lenses is the easiest way of putting it. They make lenses just that little bit different. So this particular one is a full frame 2:1 maximum magnification ratio 85mm macro lens. And it's in RF mount. Now it's available in other mounts as well, but I'm just testing it here on the RF mount. It's a mirrorless lens. Now it's a very nice little lens. You can see on the RP it's just not a very big lens, and if I take the lens cap off you can see it's actually even smaller. There we go, let's take that off there. Now manual focus, manual aperture, goes from F5.6 to F22. Now 5.6 you might think, oh, that's not much. It's actually perfectly good for macro, and means that the quality you get even wide open is very good. Now I'll include some more examples in the written review of it, but I've been testing this out, a number of different applications of it. I do macro photography as part of our commercial photography business, but I don't do photography in general of flowers, animals, fungi, all the standard stuff you'll see in macro reviews and that a lot of people think is macro. I tend to do it for engineering use. Now the lens here, so just take it off. There we go, nice and light. The full specs are in the written review. It is quite a small lens up front, but macro lenses often tend to be. It's fully internal focusing, so nothing moves. You can see the internal elements moving as you change the focus, and it's got a nice good smooth focus throw. The aperture has click stops on it, so yeah, if you want to use it for video you may find a slight issue there, but I don't do macro video. It's a nice bit of lens there. Now it's a 9-blade aperture, or even if I now count it and look at this, it's actually a 7-blade aperture. Would help if I actually counted the rings in it first. But anyway, we'll just gloss over that since I got that wrong. And looking at this end of the lens, you'll notice there's no electronics on it. Now that can be an issue for some people. Certainly means there's no such thing as autofocus. It's a fully manual lens, you set everything. But on a mirrorless camera that's really not that much of a problem, because, well, you're doing fine focus. You tend not to use auto anyway, or at least I don't, because I tend to use macro in sort of studio type of situations on a tripod, something like that. Now the example I've got here shows the screen of this camera flipped out the back to show you the focusing distance. So at 1:1, so that's 1:1 reproduction ratio, you're focusing about this far in front. This is for a nominal 85mm focal length. That's pretty good. And you can see the size of it there. Now the next example I've got is taking that to 2:1, and you can see how close you still are. It's not bad. I'm used to 2:1 working with macro lenses, having to focus quite close. This gives you a bit more depth. Now the settings for this, I've just got this on auto ISO in this particular example here, but I tend more to work fully manual with macro stuff. So if I just go back, you'll see the distance. That's 1:1. You can see it on the screen. And if I go from 2:1, you can see it still focuses quite close there. But there's enough space so that if you're using lighting, it doesn't get in the way. And in terms of using lighting, most example shots I took were using either LED lights or natural light, but I did also use the lens with a ring flash. Now this is Canon F1 I tested a few years ago that I use. I needed to get a step-up ring for it because it's only 46mm filter size on here, so I needed something to step up to it. Now, problem with ring flashes sometimes and macro is that you end up working so close that the ring flash either touches the subject or doesn't properly light it. Here it's absolutely fine. Now I've used that for testing, and I've also tried using a set of extension tubes. Now these are RF extension tubes, and so that's RF mount this side, RF mount that side, which work well. They have electronics in them, but the camera doesn't see the lens, so you could use dumb extension tubes on it. Now these are the ones I normally use with for macro work. Quite often in the past I've used the Canon TSE90 as a tilt shift lens, but a 90mm lens. Add to that the extension tubes, and it's quite a hefty lens compared to that. And this is not a true macro lens either. Close focus, yes. If you get the latest version of this TSE90, which does have macro, goes up to 1:1, it's even bigger. So there's a big difference in size, a big difference in cost as well for it. Adding all that mechanism makes a big difference. It's a stunning lens to use, but it's a bit on the pricey side for just casual use. So we've got some stuff I've used with that there. Now, this is just a normal picture of using the lens, which you can use as a normal 85mm lens. I was looking through some electronics junk, my electronics junk box, and this is just a photograph of a load of chips in a box. Some of these are quite old processor chips. There is an Intel 4004 there are all kinds of processors. Many years ago I used to be an electronics designer, one of my previous careers before I took up photography. It's one of the reasons I do engineering photography and the likes, because I understand the subject well. But that's just a normal picture. There's virtually no distortion in it. In terms of chromatic aberration, at these distances it's almost imperceptible. There might be a tiny bit, fraction of a pixel you can see on it, but very little, and it's easily correctable with raw processing. So in Photoshop, something like that, you can easily correct it. When I've zoomed in more, I've seen virtually no longitudinal chromatic aberration, so that means things beyond the point of focus and closer than the point of focus have slight colour fringing. That's not there. And lateral chromatic aberration, which is what you see around the edges of things in focus towards the edge of the field, that's not there. The lens is nice and sharp. This is a demo version of the lens, a sample version of the lens. It's fine. You'll need to have a look at reviews that do detailed analysis of lens characteristics, and ideally of several lenses, if you're really interested in that side of things. I'll have some information in the written review, but not necessarily in the stuff I'm going to cover here. Now if I go down a bit, this is looking a bit closer. This is at almost just beyond 1:1. These are tiny surface mount chips. The detail is good. This is at about f8. You can see there is a nice look to the outer focus areas. Lens works very well for that. There's another one. Now this is at 2:1. These are tiny, these chips. These are just a few millimeters across. And if you're wondering about the background, the colour, it's just a blank DVD. All of this is lit with LED lighting, white LED lighting, but the effect of the DVD just gives the colour. That means you have to experiment a bit with moving lights around and various things like this, but it can give quite a striking look to it. It's a really simple way of doing things. Here's a display chip. Now, This is gold on this, and this is a 5x7 dot matrix display, individual characters. We're talking 20th century technology here. This stuff like this doesn't get used anymore, but I've still got loads of it from back when I used to design this sort of stuff and actually build and repair things like this. I would notice on this particular chip, these pins are 2.54mm or 1/10 of an inch apart, so it gives you an idea of the scale. That's also at about F8, and we've got a reasonable bit of depth of field. We've got a bit of softness at the back there. Remember though that when you're working close up, the fact that this lens goes to f/22, you're still not going to get very much depth of field when you're working at 2:1 magnification. If you need depth of field, you end up doing stacking, which is what I do for, quite often for pictures like this. I'll do a form of stacking, but these are just single shots just to show what the lens is like. It's sharp, I can see detail, it looks good. Now, just to sort of round things off, nip out into the garden, just using the ring flash. It's November, there aren't many flowers open in the garden at the moment, but this particular one works very nicely. You can see some of the patterns from droplets of water on it which come from the ring flash. That's handheld. That's somewhere between 2:1, 1:1 reproduction ratio. I've not noted it there. And the other thing is, I don't know what it is because it's a fully manual lens, there's no electronics in it, and that means no EXIF data. So the only EXIF data you will have from the shot is the ISO setting and the shutter speed. The aperture, the focus settings, they are what they are. That's not recorded. Now, that doesn't normally cause a problem, but I do mention it just because some people may not be familiar with it with using fully manual lenses. And I just round off with an image here. This is a fuchsia flower, and the detail, the fine detail on it, I can see a bit of spider thread, and it also gives a nice feel for the out of focus look of the lens. Now, I've used macro lenses which give sharp detail on a very narrow plane, but when you go to look at out of focus areas, they are harsh. The shapes are not, the out of focus areas are not very nice. This lens has obviously been designed to give a nice-ish look to out of focus areas, and that makes a difference for your photos. Means that you don't have to do so much post-processing sometimes, because sometimes some macro lenses I've used, they really do have quite harsh out of focus areas and highlights and things. This one seems to work well. So there you have it. That's the new Laowa 85mm, very small full frame macro used here on an EOS RP, so 26 megapixel on this. If you've got a camera with image stabilization, you would probably be able to get away with taking many more shots handheld, but I used the ring flash and it worked very well on that. Or you could use another multiple flash unit of some sort. Now, I've got quite a few of the reviews of those. They're mostly written reviews though on the Northlight Images site. And I would say if you want more detail, I put more pictures, higher resolution pictures, and more details showing aberrations and out of focus areas are actually on the written article that goes with this. But there you have it. There's Laowa's new 85mm F5.6 Macro lens. Very nice, and thank you Laowa for lending it to me. Unfortunately they want it back. Never mind. And I hope that's a bit of interest. If you find the articles and the videos of interest, please do sign up, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to have lots more stuff like this, supplementing the written articles on both this and on printing and other aspects of photography. So thank you.